Please welcome Achieving the Dream Chief Operating Officer, Angela Dorn.
Good afternoon. Hi, folks. We're ready to get started with our next plenary session. I am Angela Dorn, and I am very excited to be here this afternoon. I am attending my first dream. How many folks here are attending their first dream session? Fantastic. Before I got to this dream, I was told that the best thing about Dream was hearing the stories of the Dream scholars, and that was so very true. I now have the honor of introducing our next Dream scholar, Margarita Lesueur of Broward College.
Hello, everyone. Now, before I begin, I would like to congratulate all of my fellow scholars for sharing their story with us. A few of you guys got me a little teary-eyed, so I'm going to try not to cry during my own poem here. All right. I am from the sun's golden rays, which constantly kisses my black skin. I am from sparkling sun glitter, which coats pristine coastal waters. I am also from a diverse city where greetings can range from hola a todos to bonjour tout le monde, and of course, hello. As a daughter of Haitian immigrants, I am from a band of hard workers whose absence from our home keeps it eerily quiet, but loud with the sound of my own lonely thoughts, where only the jiggling of keys at the front door at night gifts me with relief, and where the groans of exhaustion from my parents reassures me that they are home, safe. I am from a family who taught me to find encouragement in the bravery of my forefathers, who had not only the strength, but courage that I can only aspire to have. Because when I was younger, I was from the stenches of skin whitening creams that once used to have a grip not only on my skin, but on my self-esteem, beginning at the ripe age of 12. I am from a family who retaught me self-love and saved me from my once self-detrimental behaviors. I am from a place where many kids lug the weight of their families on their shoulders. And I was that one luminous star in my parents' dark universe to become that one drop of hope to prove that hard work really does bring you a long way in life. I am from the tribulations I have faced as a first-generation college student, where there were times I felt drained, but never despondent. I am from Broward College, and it's Robert Bob Elmore Honors College. An institute where fellowships, student success, and diligent scholarship are strongly encouraged. I am blessed to have found refuge in such a college, which has molded me into the student and woman that I am today, and whose opportunities allow me to firmly believe that who you are, where you come from, and what you have or do not have should not prevent you from achieving your dreams. Thank you. I am from the struggles that I and my family have overcome. I am from the smiles of my ancestors up above. I am Aldwina Lassell, and I am a scholar who believes that her dreams are valid. Thank you.
Marjuina, thank you so much for sharing your story. Just one more round of applause. Thank you so much. It is now my pleasure to introduce Cindy Yahola of the M. Juliet Powwow organization and her special guests. Are they coming?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Nashville, Tennessee. I hope you're enjoying your visit here while you're here, and my deepest apologies for all the rain. It's a terrible time of the year. But anyway, we are here representing the Mount Juliet Powwow, which is a Native American organization here in Tennessee. It was formed a few years ago to help promote the Native culture and heritage here in Tennessee, because there's no Native tribes here any longer because they were removed during the 1800s during the Indian Removal Act. We are Muskogee Creek, me and my daughter, and then we have Stephen White Eagle with us, who is Cheyenne Arapaho, and we're just here today to share a little bit of Native culture with you, and we hope you enjoy it. And it's been my honor to be here and welcome you all to Nashville and enjoy their dancing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really incredible. We appreciate your performance. Thank you. Good answer. I now have the pleasure of inviting ATD's President and CEO to the stage, Dr. Karen Stout.
So welcome to lunch. I'm only up here for a short period of time. As we begin this plenary, and as you can see, we're doing the plenary while we are eating. So as we begin the plenary, which has been historically focused on teaching and learning, I want to take this opportunity to recognize with tremendous appreciation and respect, one of Achieving the Dream's own, Rachel Singer. Rachel, you want to travel up here just so we can, while I start to talk a little bit about you. Prior to joining Achieving the Dream in 2011, Rachel was a national leader. She was the driver of the Learning Communities work at Kingsborough Community College. She led a FIPSE grant to spread the learning community methodology to other colleges across the country. At the time, in joining Achieving the Dream, Rachel brought important field-based leadership and insight into ATD, a capacity that we continue to build today. Rachel joined in 2011 as Vice President for Community College Relations and Applied Research, eventually transitioning into a role as a Senior Fellow. During her tenure, she led the Catalyst Project funded by Gates that involved 4 of our leader colleges. It was one of the first funded learning initiatives launched by Achieving the Dream. The goal was to effectively scale developmental education reforms, and the 4 colleges, if you're here in the audience, give yourself a shout out: Durham Technical Community College, Patrick Henry, Brazosport, and Bunker Hill. This helped ATD begin to understand more about some critical issues within the teaching and learning space. She also assisted us with the development of the institutional capacity assessment framework, particularly the section on teaching and learning. And at ATD, she has been our go-to person on teaching and learning with organizations primarily around developmental education, but also in other teaching and learning strategies in partnerships with AACC, AACNU, the Dana Center, and Carnegie. Rachel helped plan and execute the first annual Math Pathways Institute with the Dana Center last May, and she was our Achieving the Dream representative on the Evergreen State Summer Teaching and Learning Institute. When funding from the Trade Adjustment Act grant was made available, and ATD worked with Passaic Community College and 7 others in the Northeast region around resiliency, she was a designer of the grant. So she's touched many of you in this room with her efforts. There's a lot more I could say. The most important thing I'll say about Rachel, and the students will like this, she's a graduate of Kingsborough Community College. Her contributions to ATD are fundamental and enduring, and I want to thank her for her dedication to student success and her tireless efforts on behalf of Achieving the Dream. Thank you, Rachel, and congratulations on your retirement. So next, I would like to invite John Azuni to the stage. John is our Director of Teaching and Learning at Achieving the Dream, and he's following in Rachel's footsteps, also coming from the field, having been the director of the, and I don't have his title right at Monroe, but he was the director of the Teaching and Learning Center at Monroe Community College. So please welcome John to the stage, and he will lead us through the next part of the plenary. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Before we get on to our presentation, it's my pleasure to recognize our 2017 cohort, which includes 34 tribal colleges and universities. If you are part of a team from one of these institutions who joined our network in 2017, can you please stand and be recognized? Thank you. Next, we would like to welcome 8 colleges that have been accepted into our new cohort for 2018. Please stand when I call your name, and I ask that we hold our applause until I have announced all 8 colleges. Coahoma Community College, County College of Morris, Gateway Community College, Harford Community College, Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, Olympic College, Palm Beach State College, and Rogue Community College. Let's welcome them into our new 2018 cohort. The focus of this afternoon's plenary is striving for equity in teaching and learning. Our hope is that this session will push our collective thinking and serve as a reminder that the work of equity is everybody's work. At this morning's plenary, our colleague Mayen Ireland challenged us to put students at the center and to remember that equity must be the why, the what, and the how of our work. Our panelists are amazing exemplars of what it looks like when we take up this challenge in our teaching and learning work. And their stories are also a terrific reminder to us of the great strides we can make when faculty, staff, and administrators build authentic, enduring collaborations in the interest of our students. So yes, we must put students at the center, we must keep students at the center, and we must remember that equity work is everybody's work. Our plenary speaker, Dr. Sia Verschelden, will provide a brief presentation and will then moderate our panel. At the conclusion of the session, Dr. Verschelden's book will be on sale at a table down here by the stage, and she will be available to meet with attendees and sign books. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Verschelden. Sia is the Executive Director of Institutional Assessment at the University of Central Oklahoma, where she also teaches in sociology. From 2009 to 2012, she was the Vice President for Academic Affairs at Highland Community College in Kansas. She previously worked at Kansas State University, serving as a faculty member in social work, the Director of Women's Studies, and then Director of Assessment. Sia has a BS in psychology from Kansas State, an MSW from the University of Connecticut, and an Ed.D. from Harvard University. Dr. Verschelden's presentation will draw on her 2017 book entitled Bandwidth Recovery, Helping Students Reclaim Cognitive Resources Lost to Poverty, Racism, and Social Marginalization, in which she makes the case that the mental bandwidth of many college students in certain non-majority groups is depleted by persistent economic insecurity and psychosocial underminers such as racism and homophobia. Her work also focuses on in-class and out-of-class interventions and attention to campus environments that can help students regain bandwidth so they can be academically successful. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sia Verschelden. Enjoy. Thanks for being here.
Good afternoon. Whoa, I guess that works. Okay, you people way in the back, hold your hand up so I can see that you're awake. Okay, I was hanging out back there this morning and it's like some of you are trying to maintain your intellectual objectivity, but really, I really want you to be engaged. So let's take a deep breath. Oh, I know some of you had your mouth full, so that probably wasn't a very good idea. And if I drop my glasses, I usually have them on a string, but it'll bother the mic, so I'll probably take them off and they'll end up on the floor. I want to thank everybody here for all the work that you do. Thanks, John, and others at ATD for inviting me here. I'd also like to take a moment to thank all these people who are in the room and those in the kitchens who prepared this food and served it and are going to be cleaning up after us. Woo! I also want to thank the dancers. That was wonderful to see those dancers. And I was looking up the history of Nashville, and I saw that Native people were here in about the year 1000 in the Common Era. And in fact, they were here all the time between that and the 1700s when Nashville started, or what is now Nashville. There are many descendants of the Native people who were in Tennessee, now in where I live in Oklahoma, because of Indian renewal. So I want to acknowledge that we are on land that was somebody else's, as the land I live in, Kansas. So I want to remind you that on the conference website, I have put a list of resources which has all the books that I will mention, there's just a few, and then some handouts that I'll highlight, but they should be on the resources on the web for the conference. So I want to begin by asserting that we live in a racist, classist, homophobic, sexist, nativist, and I don't mean Native American Indians, nativist country. And that those of us who grew up here have soaked in lots of that in our whole lifetime. And if you want to discuss that with me, we can do it afterwards, but there's not time now. So that's just gonna be, we're just gonna accept that. So I want to talk about our brains just for a minute. Right now, as we're sitting here, our brains are doing about 11 billion bits of activity. What are they doing? Actually, I think it's 11 million. I get mixed up, but really it doesn't matter, right? A whole bunch of stuff. So they are helping us breathe. They're pumping our heart. We don't have to think about our heart pumping our blood through our body. As you're eating, your stomach is starting to digest. So our brains are doing millions of things every second. And we have conscious control over fewer than 100 of those bits of activity. And that's what I'm talking about. You have some bandwidth on your tables, I hope. This was offered for free, no extra charge for extra bandwidth. And if there's not enough for everybody at your tables, that's just a good demonstration that we are all short on bandwidth, okay? So my talk today, I'm gonna talk about this as bandwidth. So I think my mental bandwidth is about the width of my head, and also, coincidentally, it's the width of a piece of paper. So it was very easy to make these and cut them up, okay? So if you have all your bandwidth, so you're not worried about money, you're not having racist comments made toward you, you're not an LGBTQ person who is not out, you walk into your classroom or your office with all your bandwidth intact, right? That's all your cognitive resources that you have are all there. Some people call them attentional resources. You have them all there. A few years ago, I read a book called Scarcity that was by an economics professor from Harvard and a psychology professor from Princeton. And they asserted that scarcity steals mental capacity. And they called that mental capacity bandwidth. And that's where I got the term bandwidth. Okay? So they're saying that when you're poor, being poor takes up lots of bandwidth. I'm not going to have you raise your hand, but some of you I know probably grew up poor and you know what I'm talking about. Some of you may right now have some economic insecurity. And if you don't, you can think of your students, right? Many of your students are in persistent conditions of economic security. And they are saying that poverty steals mental bandwidth. And that book, Scarcity, has many, many studies by them and other people that show that. So when I read that, scarcity steals mental bandwidth, I thought of all our students. And there is more than one kind of scarcity, right? There's scarcity of respect, of safety, of belonging. All these kind of things are types of scarcity. So if you are poor, or your students are poor, you can just fold back some of that bandwidth. That bandwidth is just not there. If you're poor, you're worried about your car breaking down and your kids getting sick and what you're going to have to eat and sometimes where you're going to live and how you're going to get in out of the cold. So students who are poor, some of their cognitive resources are just taken up by those worries. They're just not there. I'm going to talk about just a few psychosocial underminers that John mentioned. There are many of them, but I'm just going to mention stereotype threat, microaggressions, and belongingness uncertainty. So most of you know what microaggressions are, right? Hold your hand up if you've heard that term. Okay, most of you have. So they're the daily insults and indignities that people in non-majority groups just have thrown at them every day, sometimes every hour. And the insidious thing about microaggressions is that they are subtle. Sometimes they're not so subtle, but often they're subtle, okay? And the person who's, I was going to say spewing, that's a little harsh. The person who is saying that microaggression may or may not intend it to be hurtful. So the person who hears that has to wonder, was that a racist comment? Was that a sexist comment? And that takes up cognitive resources, right? The person who says it doesn't use any bandwidth. But if you hear microaggressions all day, that is taking up cognitive resources because you're having to sort through whether that person meant it. And the really nasty thing about microaggressions is they're not usually very confrontable because if you confront them, it just often makes things worse. Oh, you're too sensitive. That's not what I meant. You know what I mean? And so you just eat it psychologically. You just swallow it. Experts are telling us that the old kind of racism, sometimes microaggressions are part of what's called modern racism. They're telling us that the old kind of racism, which unfortunately is now sometimes accepted as the regular racism, unfortunately, that people were just racist right to your face. That was awful, but it was less damaging to cognitive resources than these microaggressions. Belongingness uncertainty, Walton and Cohen talk about this. This is for non-majority and first-generation students who come to school. They don't have the social networks or the social capital, and they don't feel like they belong. In all of my reading, belongingness comes out time and time again. If you feel like you belong in a place, you have more cognitive resources. Stereotype threat. Does everybody know what this is? Okay, stereotype threat was named in the mid-90s by Claude Steele and Josh Aronson. It's the phenomenon that happens when a member of a non-majority group is in a situation where that non-majority status is important. So, for instance, black students at my college, okay? So when you're in that situation, you are worrying that you're going to confirm a stereotype. So there's a stereotype in this country that black students aren't as smart as white students. So if you're put in a performance situation, you're worried your performance is going to confirm that stereotype, and people are going to say, yep, we were right. Black students aren't as smart. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that worry, conscious or unconscious, actually depresses your performance. And this has been shown over and over again. Women in math and science. There's an article called When White Men Can't Do Math. There's, I don't know, something about white men jumping, I think. So a stereotype threat is completely contextual. So for instance, a white sprinter in the Olympics could suffer a stereotype threat, right? Because for some reason, the way the sport has evolved, most of the really good sprinters are black, right? Okay, there's nothing biological about that. It just is, that's how things have evolved. So those just are three things I wanted to mention on the sort of downside. And then I want to get to some interventions. And I forgot a very important thing. So I'm going to back up to Mulanathan and Shafir's book, Scarcity. They explain that in this country, we blame students for being poor. We say that people are poor because they make bad decisions. If you understand this bandwidth perspective, the reality is that the condition of being poor causes you to make bad decisions, especially in environments that encourage bad choices. How many of you have payday loan places around your school and city? We've got them all over the place in Oklahoma. And the whole predatory lending on the housing, when many people lost their houses, that's about encouraging poor people to make bad choices. And because they're lacking bandwidth, they can easily make those bad choices. Okay, does that make sense? Yes, okay. Okay, now, before I get to the interventions, I want to say that I consider what I'm saying is a strengths perspective. Any other social workers in the house? No? Okay, so strengths perspective is key to social work. We don't want to focus on people's deficits, we want to focus on their strengths. So I say this is a strengths perspective because our students have this much cognitive ability, right? But because of these psychosocial underminers and because of poverty, it is depleted by things outside of their control. Okay? So you can be the best teacher in the world, but if students are coming in your class with this much bandwidth, it's not getting through to their long-term memory, let alone their short-term memory. Okay, does this make sense? So then our job is not to condemn those students or say they're not motivated or they don't care. It is to help them recover cognitive resources. So I'm going to talk about a few things. Let me say something about identity-safe environments. So Claude Steele talks about stereotype threat, but then he, in his book, Whistling Vivaldi, which I'd highly recommend, it's on the list, he kind of, through the book, evolves into talking about identity-safe and identity-threat environments. Identity-safe environments are places where you see yourself for students. In the leadership, in the pictures on the wall, I have taken a picture of all the images in all the buildings on my campus, and we're working on this. Because if you are a student who is non-majority student, and all you see on the walls are white people, and in my case, young white people, that could be an identity threat environment. You need to be able to see yourself. There's another, these are all handouts, so I'm going to run out of time, but you can look at them later. A high hope syllabus. I got this from Chaffey College, but the handout is things I do in my class. High hope syllabi are high challenge and high support. And you break things down, you know what scaffolding is? So you break big assignments down into smaller parts. And you have lots of things in your syllabus. I was in a session today where people say they're inviting syllabi. They're not just all the things not to do. Connecting the known to the unknown, and this is about belonging. So students come into our courses with funds of knowledge, and I learned this from my early childhood colleagues. Gonzalez and his colleagues talk about funds of knowledge. So every student comes with this fund of knowledge that they have from just living their lives. I would assert that if you are if you grew up in poverty in this country, and you're a person of color, or you might be in the LGBT community and not feel safe to be out, you have lots of fund of knowledge if you made it to college, right? You're coming in, but what we usually do is focus on what they don't have, like they can't read well enough, they can't do math well enough, right? But they are bringing so many funds of knowledge to the table. They bring so much to the table. Let's start with what they do bring to the table and then see what about that could help them to learn math and reading. But much of it is about belonging. So connecting the known to the unknown. I have my students do life reports. You can talk with me about the details of all of these things later. There's a values affirmation intervention that's about students identifying their things they value in their lives and then writing about them. The research shows doing that takes about 20 minutes, increases GPAs and retention. And I think it's because whoever asks our non-majority and poor students and LGBT students what they value? Not very often. In fact, I think we assume what they value isn't the same as higher ed values. And so it's a deficit. So I think just asking them and affirming that yes, you have values and you live by them, and they change, they've affected how you live your life. Growth mindset. 3 minutes, woo. Okay, growth mindset. Carol Dweck's book called Mindset. I'm a growth mindset person, and what I mean by that is we can grow our brains. You know about growth mindset? Hold your hand up. I think a lot of you do. Okay, so we can grow our brains versus a fixed mindset, which is I can't do math or I can't do anything. So she says you can learn anything. Professor, I think Luke something, I'm losing his name, at San Diego State, I read an article or a speech he made that he says with poor students, he was talking about young black men, you have to talk about their ability and their effort. Because growth mindset says it's about effort. Carol Dweck says anybody can learn anything. But because certain subpopulations in our culture live in communities and situations, and because of racism and poverty, they are told often they're not good enough. They don't have the capacity. So just praising their effort is not enough by itself. We need to assure them they have the capacity, and they have to do effort, but we do have to do the assurance that they have the capacity. So growth mindset, there's a handout called Neurobics, which is about neural and aerobics, and it's about once you have the intervention with students where you tell them about growth mindset, then these are exercises they can do to grow their brains. Okay? This guy's down here with his fingers like this, doing these things. I ask him to, but still it's really a little bit obnoxious. Okay, one more thing is counter spaces. I want to talk about counter spaces. Counter spaces are spaces on your campuses, or could be off, where students find safety and they're in identity-safe environments. So Beverly Daniel Tatum wrote in the 90s, why are all the black kids sitting together in the cafeteria? And she's just done an update. So this was right after the civil rights movement. All us liberal people thought everything's cool, everybody can sit together in the cafeteria, and you go in the cafeteria, and there's the black students and the Hispanic students and the skaters, and we're saying, what's wrong? Well, I think we're understanding they are finding counter spaces. They are creating their own counter space. So students create them, or you can help them create them. You can have a center for Native American studies. You can have an LGBT center where students could come and feel safe, because that's where they can gain back some bandwidth they lost all day with all the constant negativity that's thrown at them if they're in these groups. Okay, does that make sense to you? Okay, I think I'm going to end with counter spaces, and and invite our panel up. Thank you so much. To find my notes.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Vicky Bisa is a member of the Le Couture Band of Ojibwe in northern Wisconsin and has spent the past 20 years living and working on the Menominee Reservation. She has served as an English instructor at College of Menominee Nation in Keshena, Wisconsin for the past 12 years. Prior to that, she worked in the Menominee Tribal K-12 education system for 5 years. Vicky earned a bachelor's degree in secondary English education from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a master's degree in English from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She also plans to pursue her doctorate in Indigenous Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay. Vicky has a deep interest in creating an education system that supports and promotes the success of Native students, and her goal is to contribute to a positive change in how that is accomplished. Michael Berndt is in his 4th year of service as the Vice President of Academic Affairs at Century College, a community and technical college located in the northeast suburbs of the Twin Cities, serving over 21,000 credit and non-credit students each year. Before that, he was the Vice President of Planning and Institutional Effectiveness at Normandale Community College. At Normandale, Michael also served as an English faculty member for several years. His work has focused on organizational development to improve student outcomes, especially improve learning and student success. In 2006, he co-authored a civics-based writing textbook entitled Composing a Civic Life, a Rhetoric and Readings for Inquiry and Action. Maria Pena began her community college career as a faculty counselor, and over the course of 27 years in higher education, has served in progressively responsible leadership roles in student services and as the inaugural Longhouse steward for the Peninsula College Longhouse. She joined Everett Community College as its first Chief Diversity and Equity Officer in 2014. Maria has a master's degree in educational psychology from the University of California, Los Angeles, and a bachelor's degree in social ecology with an emphasis in human behavior from the University of California, Irvine.
Oh, you got a plan club out there.
Christine Washburn has been a faculty member in physics and astronomy at Everett Community College for 12 years. She is co-chair of the Guided Pathways Steering Committee and co-chair of the Equity Committee. In addition to her passion for active learning in the classroom, she leads myriad efforts in career exploration and professional development for STEM students outside of the classroom. She has recently started an NSF-funded STEM Summer Bridge program for low-income first-generation students, where she is seeing firsthand many of the challenges our students face.
Thank you, John. I'd like to ask each of the panelists to give a brief description of just what your equity work is, how you get invited to this panel, and maybe where it came from. Go ahead, Vicki.
Okay, what I want to talk about isn't something that started as an institutional initiative. It's really something that happened more organically in my classroom as a faculty member at a tribal college. I teach an argumentative writing course, and about 4 years ago, the structure of this course was changed from that traditional structure to one that's centered on Native issues. So I thought that it would be a good idea on that first day for us to have a discussion on exactly what it means to be Native. You know, how are Native people often defined? Not necessarily by the students themselves, but from others from the outside. So I began this by telling them a little story about when I was 17 and I was working on my own reservation in the tribal supermarket. I was a cashier, And on a particular day, a bus of elderly people came into the store, and they had come from a nearby town a couple hours away. And when they came in, they walked around, they did some shopping, and a little elderly lady came through my checkout, and I asked her, I said, you know, what are you doing up here? And she leaned really close to me and she said, we came to see the Indians. And I said, you did? I said, did you see any? And she said, no, not yet. And mind you, there were nothing but Native people around her. So that's a funny story that students laugh out at, but it also initiates a deep conversation. So they start brainstorming all these markers that individuals use to identify Native people. And I have what I call the continuum of Indianness that we put up on the board. And just the term Indianness sparks its own conversation, but that's for another time. But we have this discussion, and we're putting up all the things that different people use to define who a Native person is. And that leads to some really deep, rich discussion on stereotypes, misconceptions, oppression, identity theft. And it's really powerful. But what I hadn't expected is that it also prompted even more powerful discussion about who we are as Native people and how we see ourselves and how our identity is often challenged. And I think this happened, more easily because as a Native woman myself, I was able to share my own experience with these students. And I think it just opened the floodgates. And I want to end by just reading a little section because this is so important to me. I don't want to miss any of it. So I'll finish with that. I began the discussion by sharing my experience as a Native woman who could identify myself in no other way except as Native. But at the same time, I have had my identity challenged, especially when moving into the world of academia and taking the risk to speak my truth as a Native woman. My skin is too light. I am not a fluent speaker of the language. I am not what I would call deeply traditional. I talked about these insecurities, these doubts, these secret discomforts, and the pain of not feeling like I belonged. Who else could I be if not Native? No one. To my shock, this discussion opened the doors to some of the most powerful moments I've experienced in the classroom. Students opened up either by sharing verbally or through the reaction paper they wrote at the end of class about many of these same experiences and feelings. It was validation and empathy. It was kinship and shared perspectives. In some cases, I would argue that it was a defining moment, the moment when a student learns that he or she is not alone and that it is not necessary to defend one's identity to anyone. This validation takes away some of the burden that prohibits students from achieving all they can. Native students already face an uphill battle. They must navigate a westernized system of education that is often counterintuitive to their own cultural beliefs. We as instructors need to provide students with a safe environment to share their truth without question. We need to provide them with the tools to build a foundation of validation strong enough to carry them forward when faced with challenges to their identity. This validation to me is an essential building block of equity. That's my spiel.
So when Century College joined ATD in 2011, we doubled down on our work to improve student success. When we looked at our completion, transfer, or persistence rates, in 2013, for example, we noted that there was a 13% gap between our white students and our students of color. And so we knew we needed to work to eliminate that gap. But the work we were committing to, it had to be systemic, and it had to get at the core of what we were doing, which is teaching and learning. And so it was actually here at DREAM in 2013 that we committed to creating an Institute for Culturally Responsive Pedagogy. And with grants from the St. Paul Foundation and the Kellogg Foundation, we were able to develop a semester-long personal and professional development program that committed participants to looking at their own values, beliefs, biases, and what they brought into the classroom and how that impacted students, as well as to work with critical race theory to look at the history of history of education in the United States, and also to look at the systems we had in place at our own college that were perpetuating bias and inequity. The participants also look at critical race or critically responsive pedagogy, and then they commit together to working on changing their own practices and looking at their curriculum and really engaging in substantive reform. And since we launched that, we've had 7 cohorts, 79 of our faculty have gone through it from 32 different disciplines. 80 to 85% of them have reported that they feel that they've made some substantive progress in becoming more critically responsive teachers and have made substantive change in their courses. And then when we look at the outcomes across the college, we are noting pockets of where we are very encouraged by the results. For example, we have an English Express that brings a developmental writing co-requisite with our composition course. And what we found in doing that model and bringing it to scale, we were seeing an increase in the success rates of all students, but within those courses, that we were seeing no achievement gap, at least in the course completion rates. And what we speculate, what we strongly think is going on, is that the people who do that training and the people who are doing those courses have been graduates of ICRP, and they're bringing what they learned into that classroom, and it's making a difference in the outcomes of those students. So.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
Would you like to go here?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to share first what inspired me to do the work that I am doing. I am the daughter of an undocumented farm worker who came to the U.S. and struggled significantly for many, many years. All of the impacts that you're talking about, my father struggled. Through that process, my father chose not to bring his family to America for fear of us suffering the same experiences as he had for many years. When we finally did come to the U.S., I was a Spanish-speaking student, a little one just coming into school, not knowing a word of English and very fearful. There are 3 things that impacted my life and what motivates my life today, and that is my first teacher decided to identify a bilingual interpreter, invited that interpreter to join her to visit our home and to talk to my parents about the capacity that I had to go to school. Wow. That inspired my parents to believe in me, even though they were fearful of all of the systems that were in place against us. Again, my parents were invited to a migrant conference, transformed their lives when they thought, wow, somebody actually believes in us and that we can make a difference for our children. And then finally, the other big motivator in my life was TRIO. I am a TRIO alum and very proud of that. It is truly what changes lives is TRIO. So I am proud to be here today with ATD to speak on behalf of a program that has moved so many lives. So to that I say, I am now fortunate to work at Everett Community College as the Chief Diversity and Equity Officer. I'm also very privileged to say that I selected that college because it has a history, decades and decades of years of work on diversity. It did not start with this position. And so I chose to go to a college that had that history already and already had the capacity and has the spirit to do the work. I think it's also extremely important to state that it has made an institutional commitment to establishing a diverse, equitable, inclusive working and learning environment. So it is not only about the student, but the employees who surround that student. Our strategic plan was built in collaboration with our local community. So when we speak of community, commonly what we are talking about is not only our campus, but our local community. Our boundaries are seamless between who we are and the community. Together, those individuals identified what our strategic plan priorities around student success, innovation, community partnerships, and of course, equity. So it is thanks to the work of the Board of Trustees and our president that this work can exist and succeed at the college. I cannot emphasize enough how important that is. But not only that it is stated in a mission and a vision, but that it is overtly and unwavering support for the work that is being done by the individuals in the front line. So when this position was hired, it was amazing to see how many resources were dedicated to the work. So not only was this position created, but so was an Equity and Social Justice Division. But my work really is about collaborating with my colleagues to do the work. I do not have but an insignificant number of positions and or funds. It really truly is a collaborative effort at our institution to move the work, and I am proud to be working with the faculty at the college to make that change happen.
So I've always had a great passion for diversity in STEM, and that's what's really brought me to this work. And I've been in many different roles in diversity in STEM. Mostly I teach physics and astronomy, though not a lot lately because I've been doing this thing. And most of that is physics, and it's calculus-based physics. And when I look at my class, they don't look like me. They don't look like the general public. And I thought, you know, I'm going to teach physics and it's going to change. There's going to be this woman teaching the class and then the women will come. But that's not how it works. So I have a lot of different things I do on the campus. I'm an advisor for students. I'm an advisor for a club. Every 6 years, I'm the program chair. I'm on a bajillion committees, all the committees that involve equity, because I have a really difficult time with the word no. And I'm the co-chair of the Guided Pathways Steering Committee and the Equity Subcommittee. And then I started a bridge program a couple of years ago because I was sick of all this pipeline work where we were like, it's someone else's fault. Let's go help those people because it's our fault too, and we are not taking care of our part of the pipeline, which is gushing. I wanted, since the theme of this plenary is teaching and learning, I wanted to give kind of a more ground level example. So my colleague across the hall and we read the same article in the Physics Teacher magazine. It's called the Physics Teacher magazine. And, and it was by Carl Wyman, who's a Nobel laureate, and his work has shifted to be more about physics education. And it was about all these different interventions you could try in your classroom. And so we're like, let's totally try one of these. So we decided to go with a growth mindset study. We didn't publish anything about this because we forgot to fill out the IRB thing, but but we learned a lot.
They won't tell anybody.
Yeah. So what we decided to do is that we teach a ton of algebra-based physics classes, and we decided that half of those classes would read a little article about study skills, and then they'd answer some reflection questions about study skills, like what was the main point of this article, and how was this going to help you as a physics student? And then the other half of the classes, they read an article about the growth mindset, just a really short Carol Dweck article about how the brain is a muscle, and you have to exercise the muscle to get it to grow. In physics, we use this third-party assessment called the Force Concept Inventory. Lots of people use it. It's really popular. It's been around forever. Like, people across the world use this. It's like this 30-question thing on Newtonian physics. So we've always done that the first day of class and the last day of class in every single physics class. So we compared those force concept inventory results for these two separate groups. And what we found was this little intervention, which, like, I'm ashamed at how easy it was. It was this little Canvas assignment with these reflection questions, graded credit, no credit. Honestly, we'd get more bang for the buck if we, like, talked about it afterwards, too. But this little tiny intervention actually closed that gender gap. The women in the class showed the same gain as the men, and it was not much. I was kind of shocked, though, because when we separated out the data in terms of majority students and minority students, we saw that the gap persisted. And I didn't really understand why, and you kind of talked about that. I learned about it on Tuesday at the Culturally Responsive Teaching Workshop, that we need to maybe do some more reading and adapt that assignment to be more responsive for our underrepresented students. So the reason I bring up this example is that the STEM folks are gonna be the first people to kind of shut you down and be like, we don't need equity here, we're fine. My equations and my graphs and my free body diagram do not involve racism, so we're cool. But But if I look around my classroom, it's incredibly clear that STEM needs to do equity work, maybe more than other people. And it needs to be more in depth than like every other problem will involve a girl name or an ethnic name. Like, sometimes we have to have the discomfort of talking about things. So it is really imperative that in teaching and learning, we are cognizant of equity and doing our teaching and learning with that equity lens.
How are we doing in time? Thank you to all of you. You can tell that they like to talk about the work that they're doing, which is excellent. And I wanted to point out that we realize this is just the tiniest little taste of what is going on at these schools. All of us have uploaded things to the website, so you can get a much more explicated picture of what is being done at these schools, and they have contact information, so you can contact them for more information. Christine, let's just go back to you for a minute. As the leader of the Pathways Project, can you tell some specific ways that an equity mindset has informed your work in Pathways?
Yeah, sure. So our college is a little bit weird because we have faculty like actually leading this work, which is weird because we're not accustomed to leading this type of thing. The thing that drew me in, the reason why I go to all these meetings and I answer all these emails is because of the equity part. I've been teaching for 12 years and I've seen like initiatives come and go, and I totally get how people are initiative fatigued because stuff comes in and we're like, we're gonna do this thing and it's gonna fix everything. And then we do the thing and it's the same. Or it's like a little better, but like it's that a rising tide will raise all boats. And if your boat was underwater, it didn't go up very high when the tide raised. So what I really love about our Guided Pathways work at the college, we are doing really intense and really intentional and really encompassing work with equity. Building our understanding of equity was not a Maria's group thing. It was an all the campus, as many community people as we could get, all the people we could possibly get to inform that. And so it's really our work. And the Guided Pathways work is centered on equity. I think, so we started our Guided Pathways work with a 2-day retreat. All the steering committee members had to be in a room together for 2 days. And that retreat was to make a mission and vision. And so we started that retreat, like Maria and I conspired. And we started it with the 5 dimensions of equity. So if you went to our concurrent session yesterday, it was pretty much that session. And then after going through 5 dimensions of equity, a facilitator came in and she talked about the history and the purpose of community college. And it was this aha moment. Oh my God, the whole point was always equity, but we were never doing equity. We wanted to, but we weren't because we were not intentional about it. So we're trying to fix that. We're trying to step back and say, we can't blame the students anymore. It is genuinely our fault. And can we fix the problem? So what that looks like, when we're doing this Guided Pathways work, so we've got, our little governance structure. I've got a subcommittee, there's a subcommittee. We're working on a project, we're making a recommendation to forward to the president about a big change that should happen. But when we're doing that work, we're asking ourselves, which of the 5 dimensions of equity fit with this work? Are there other dimensions that I'm not considering? What are my objectives for each of those 5 dimensions? And what activities am I doing to get to those objectives? So we're really moving from equity as this abstract concept to equity as a thing we do, and here's how we do it, and we have to do it with all the things. So as an example of this, I'm totally like taking credit for someone else's work. Avianca Walker and Brian Ramos in our group, they've been working on an in-person orientation, and they started that work with equity in mind. And when you design orientation with that equity lens, it looks radically different than if your boss was like, I need you to just do this thing. So instead of just being like, okay, we'll get the people, we'll say some things and we'll do a tour and we'll get them to register, it's this very intentional thing where we stop and we think, who are the students? What do they need? What are their different needs? And how are we going to meet those needs? And can we involve equitable aspiration so that our students are co-creating those dreams from the beginning with us? Can we involve equitable access so that instead of saying, doors open, you could come in, we're saying, let's build a sense of belonging, a sense of ownership, and let's talk about what you contribute to the campus and how you're more than just an FTE to us. So we've done this 5 dimensions training with a lot of campus, and so far it's been a presentation, and then we've done a bit more in-depth stuff with some parts of campus, like the Guided Pathways Steering Committee and the subcommittees, and some other groups like Student Services. But definitely the next step is a more in-depth set of work with the faculty.
Okay, thank you very much. Michael, could you tell us from your Institute for Culturally Responsive Pedagogy,
yes.
Could you just touch on a few things that you know about specific things faculty have changed about their classes or the way they interact with students from their training?
Sure. I think one of the things that has been a great value of having these cohorts is I listen to individual faculty talk about their stories and their experiences. This is a forum where they can share and mutually support each other in this work, because it's often very difficult work. The other thing that we've recognized in going through this is that people come in very different places. And so when they come out, so at the end of each cohort, they do a presentation, they talk about what they've learned, how they've grown, how they've been challenged, as well as then what artifacts or practices they're going to do differently in the classroom. And what you find is people are at varying levels. Some they're very proud of the fact that they're going to incorporate more culturally responsive materials and trying to mirror more fully the range of students they have in their classes. Others are thinking more about redesigning assignments to invite students or empower students to co-create the content so that it can reflect the multiple identities that they're bringing and the complex identities they're bringing into the learning space. Others are becoming more sensitive to the economic insecurities of our students, and so they commit to doing open educational resources or lower cost textbooks. Many of them redesign their syllabi, and so it's less about the rules and more about how do we build a community together that's asset-based rather than deficit-based. They look at multiple ways of assessing student learning and student mastery so that it's not always just the same mechanisms, multiple choice tests. And so there's a variety of ways in which they try to incorporate what they're learning. And because there is so much personal development as part of the experience, it tends to come from a more authentic place and reflect where they are. Yeah.
Very good. There's many very good examples, very clear examples. Thank you. Vicki, could you talk about the work you do in your classroom and having Native students come into contact and think about and reflect on their identity? How do you think that helps them regain bandwidth?
Well, I think it goes back to what you were saying a little bit earlier is, when Native students are focused on those issues, and I think it's not even always conscious, but it's something that's always with you. It's really hard to focus on the larger things when your attention and time is taken up with that. I also think that when students are in that struggle, performing well academically is often the last thing that's on their mind. So having that resolved and having that burden lifted, even if it's just realizing that they're not alone. Because, speaking from my own experiences, when I was growing up and even into my adulthood, this was something I felt, but it wasn't something I felt comfortable in sharing. It's something you sort of just carry with you. And you don't really think that other people are feeling the same thing. And then all of a sudden, you find out they do. And I could see that in these students' faces. It's like it was something they carried, but they couldn't talk about, and now they could. And once they started sharing, there were sometimes even tears. And it was shocking to me because I didn't realize that. And that's the kind of thing that I think frees up this bandwidth and allows them to move forward. And, speaking from a tribal college standpoint, that's a safer environment for them, I think, mostly Indian students, Native students. But when they move out into the larger universities where they might be the only Native student in a class, and I'm thinking of my own daughters who attend UW-Madison, and both of them are in an American Indian Studies course. And in that course, there's a lot of discussion about stereotypes, and one of my daughters said that she felt really uncomfortable with saying anything because she thought she was going to be judged, you know, Native or not Native. You know, the same thing I was saying earlier about, is your skin dark enough? And so she said she was really hesitant to share. And I think if students are given that forum where they can share and they can grow comfortable in their identities and they realize they don't have to defend who they are and that their truth is their own and they have every right to share it, that's going to free up that bandwidth you're talking about to really excel and be successful.
Okay, thank you. Maria, you talked about the boundaries between your campus and the community as being not there, really, that it's very much a community campus and community. Could you talk about just a couple of things that have happened as a result of that attitude and that practice in your community?
So much happens at Everett Community College as a result of that. Yep. So we're very present in the community, but the community has really driven a lot of the work that we are doing. As a matter of fact, the community is who spoke very loudly, along, of course, with campus, but to create this position, which is pretty amazing, right? It is the community that's saying we need somebody who holds that work and holds that commitment at the institution. But more than that is we now currently have what is called the Diversifying Pathways Project Management Team, and that is a collaborative effort among K-12 institutions, community college, us, and a four-year institution, University of Washington, Bothell. And together we are working to address the systemic issues around serving our students into, specifically, because this is what the community said, is we want to diversify our workforce for the teaching profession and the healthcare profession. And so we came together and they said, so here's the beauty of it. When you do that, you bring forward capacity that we do not by ourselves have. So in engaging in those conversations, we now have developed what is a pipeline for students. So we're studying that work. We're in the early part of that work, and it takes a lot of years and much commitment from every one of those CEOs of those organizations for us to have those conversations. But what's amazing is the conversations that we have had collaboratively, because both Christine and Ann sit in that committee, and we talk about the teachers to the faculty, to everybody, and how are we having conversations across these organizations to address the systemic problems that we're having. But it's as simple as our language, but it's clear that there's policies in place that break down our capacity to be able to work with each other. So that's been really, really great. I know that time is an issue, but I did want to share that we also, Christine, you referenced the development of the 5 dimensions of equity. And I have to say that that's in large part because of communications, not only that we have had on campus and with our students, faculty, and staff, but we've also had it with our local community. So in the long run, those 5 dimensions of equity belong to all of us, and now we have common language to begin to make change, true change happen within our community, which are the students that come to Everett Community College.
Excellent, thank you. And of course, we're not going to tell you what the 5 dimensions of equity are, because you have to read the things that you can download from the website and find out what they are. I think we are so close to time. I don't want to ask people to give like a 30-second, well, we have 2 minutes? Okay. I don't have any trust that any of you can talk for 20 seconds, but, okay. So you have 30 seconds to issue a challenge to this group. We talk about our students. We want to have high challenge and high support. So they're going to offer a challenge to you from their work. And of course, we're all offering our support to help you do that. So, Vicki?
Okay, real quickly, I'm uniquely positioned as a Native instructor to bring forward these discussions with students. And I know if you're not Native, it's probably much more challenging and a bit scary to do so. But I would say, you know, don't be afraid to talk about things. Often, if you're coming from a place that's genuine, students will see that. And what they're really looking for is that opportunity to share their perspectives and to learn from one another. So,
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Michael?
Good. So at the end of each cohort, I come and listen to the presentations, and two of the cohorts so far, the faculty have sat me down, and they look at me and they speak very frankly, and they said, and you kind of alluded to this, Marie, they said, what are you going to do as a leader in this college to support our work? Because you're preparing us to be rabble-rousers. And we're going to go out there and we're going to point out things that are not right, that we need to fix, and we need resources. And so what are you going to do to support that work? So that is something that we as leaders need to commit both on a personal level as well as a professional level to this work if it's going to succeed.
Absolutely. Thank you. Maria? Love that. No time for applause.
Okay, no, okay.
We're serious about this deadline.
One sentence, diversify your workforce. What you are hearing here today is these students need the individuals who look and sound and have lived experiences. We continue to battle that until we diversify the workforce. So we are, because you asked us, not only will we challenge you, but I want to acknowledge we have about 20-some from Everett Community College. A significant number of those individuals were involved in creating a whole new process for hiring that has those 5 dimensions integrated into our hiring practices. But you know, hiring is not only about hiring, it's about recruitment, it's about screening them, onboarding them, and then the retention plan. So we would be happy to share that with you. That was 30 seconds.
I just want to highlight something awesome that I heard from Community College of Baltimore, and that is that equity is not a new niche thing. It's the new standard for what it means to be a competent educator. And what we're doing here
now
is
we can have applause.
rising to. Yeah, Sia said don't applaud. So we have to know that that's deep work. It is personal work, and you have to clean house in order for this to be effective. You can't send the people to a training and expect equity will happen. You have to reflect for yourself, and you have to support each other. We've been hearing at all these sessions that we need to stop assuming the worst about the students. We need to be compassionate to the students. We need to support and engage the students. And I challenge you to do those things for each other.
Thank you so much to all. I want to have one final point, and this is about, actually some of you have already mentioned this, but it's about identity-safe environments, and you've all kind of mentioned that, and authenticity. And I heard at another conference a couple of weeks ago, this was about children's books, mostly picture books, and this woman said that children need window books and mirror books. I had never heard that before. So our students need windows, so they need to see what's out there, and they can get there, but they also need mirrors. They need to see themselves so that they can feel like they have the capacity to engage. So that was meaningful to me, that our students need windows and mirrors. And thank you to all of you.
Our thanks to Sia Verschelden and the panel. As a reminder, Dr. Verschelden's books are for sale down here. She'll be available to sign books and to meet with you. I want to thank you all again. I'm inspired. I hope you are. Let's go do our best work. Thank you very much.